All right, I'm joined today by Dane Baptiste and Howard Cohen, who together form Dane Baptiste Questions Everything. How are you guys?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm
Good.
all right.
I'm very good, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you on. I must admit, I've been keen to arrange this for a long time, and there's been various things that have got in the way, notably the pandemic, because originally I was hoping to meet you guys at the Acast studios, but we're here now, and it's great to have you. For anybody who's listening who is unaware of the show, Dane,
What the
Howard,
fuck are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your life?
I don't know who wants to take
as Howard
this.
was saying, we tend to ask questions. Some of those might include existential ones, like what the fuck are you doing with your life if you're not listening to our podcast?
Come on,
Sort yourself out. And you know that's the point, is that we want people to sort themselves out by beginning to question their reality, because we feel like on our podcast, revolution and change always begins with people asking questions about their current situation. And also we kind of like want people to be able to have a catharsis of the stuff that goes on in their heads, but they don't really feel like asking, which is a big part of like comedy as well, is that the payoff is that you get to say what people are thinking, whereas now we kind of just give them the platform to say what they're thinking anyway, outside of the confines of a comedy club.
Nice. I didn't even have to ask you.
We knew what you were hoping for us to say. Yeah.
Pretty obvious, right? Pretty obvious what we're going to discuss. How did it come about originally? How did you two meet or know each other before?
Television.
Yes.
Comedy. Watch comedy, and then try and get people in comedy onto television.
Mm-hmm.
Dane came. I saw him live, but then he came to a company that's now doesn't exist, which isn't a good sign. For a casting session for a show that no longer exists, right. And we just got along. I just enjoyed spending time with Dane, and then I did actually have a pilot for a show that doesn't exist, and me and Dane sat in the canteen, and Dane talked, and I said to him, "Mate, no one ever hears this from you. This bit of you." We don't get on stage.
And then I said to Howard, we should probably do something that will continue to exist. And so after being involved in so many projects that failed to exist, Howard was like, I want to make something that's tangible and real. And as I said, being able to kind of give the mind behind the work and the art, kind of realized that there's probably a lot of people who are known for what they do as opposed to who they are or how they think. And so where there's a lot of podcasts where celebrity guests are kind of invited to discuss other aspects of their celebrity life or popular culture, we kind of just wanted to kind of be a lot more minimalist and humanize the whole idea of celebrity and popular culture, and therefore, you know, allow us to know how other people think when, you know, they are outside of their job designation.
But also that you end up with this interesting thing, Adam, where like, you know, someone might end up coming to our show for Dane, or they might come to the show for the episode with like Ramesh Ranganathan or Jimmy Carr or a number of other guests that are very celebrated. But then when they spot like, I don't know, Trisha Goddard, they're like, oh, I wonder what she's got to say. And we get like really good stuff out of Trisha Goddard. And then they might go, oh, I've never heard of Gary Young. I think I saw him on Twitter the other day. And then they listen to... So you end up with people...
Well, even people like Jonathan Pye, who more frequently tend to ask
really good
to have more of a... maybe provide the answers that everyone wants to kind of provide. It's giving them the platform whereby what's the premise for the, Jonathan Pye, I guess, narrative. And I guess, it's a quintessential example of someone who questions their reality and then wants to have that catharsis. So it's we just want to provide therapeutic services to people at cost-effective rates and have fun.
Do you
doing
like it, Adam?
Yeah, luckily, I'm very happy you've asked me that question, and I can honestly answer that I do, because obviously, I speak to a lot of different podcasters, don't always listen to all of them, but try and listen to at least one episode. But yeah, I got much more into yours during the pandemic, and I think I enjoyed the variety of things that were being discussed. It wasn't just talking about the pandemic, talking about how people are getting on with lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. You were talking about a wide selection. And I think one of the joys is that, most of the time you're talking about fairly highbrow stuff, and we're learning about interesting subjects, and I've been educated by the podcast, but also sometimes you just talk about the silly kind of stuff that, everybody talks about in the pub.
Good example happened the other week with comedian Suze Kempner, broadcaster Suze Kempner. She does a number of
polymath Suze Kempner, pretty much.
Polymath Suze Kempner. And she said, basically, will VHS ever have a comeback? And we went into, I'm not going to debate this now, but like we went into the VHS conversation, which people of a certain generation. And then my question, because of the timing of the show, was all about Afghanistan. And we decided to spend the rest of the episode just talking about Afghanistan. So to go from VHS to Afghanistan, I mean, maybe you could draw a link between that, Dane. I don't know. It shows the breadth of conversation.
I'm sure there's one link there as well. I mean, I think at that particular time, the way we made the segue was the fact that historically, terrorist cells would film themselves and have to set up the entire equipment. Whereas now they're able to just upload stuff straight away, and it's not sure if that maybe helps or hinders the efforts. So, I mean, what we try to do really, Adam, is that like there's no real way of sequencing the topics that we kind of discuss. I think what I'd said to Howard, because we was able, when we came up with the idea, was like after having an in-depth and almost informal conversation outside of industry, it was like, you know what people used to enjoy when they were younger, kind of was like slumber parties. That's where you could stay up and ask these kind of questions and have that kind of platonic platform to think about things that keep you awake at night. And then at some point, as you become adults, well, slumber parties are normally prefaced by someone having to have sex or, not having sex. And then you have to use more artificial means to keep yourself company, because I think we're both receptive at that time of night. So the idea was that we wanted to kind of reintroduce that kind of setting where it's just as relaxed, as informal as if you were lying in a couple sleeping bags with your friends. And talking about stuff that probably doesn't make sense to people outside of it, but doing it in a way that it's enough that it's still accessible, so it's not a closed circle conversation. So we also, and that's why it's called Question Everything, is because we also encourage, mainly from the viewers, to remind them that they take, they are the integral part of the show, and the more questions they ask, the longer we can keep going. And also, you can never run out of asking questions, because even when you're like, "What, you guys shut the fuck up or go away?" That's still a question. So people are like, why would you guys die? That's still a question that we're able to answer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the couple of examples I wrote down to give people an idea of the breadth of the episodes that you've had. We go from Ed Miliband, his episode, which I really enjoyed, where the main question there was how far left can the UK go? And then Jade Adams talked about biscuits, chocolate or sweets.
Yeah, good question. Well, but I think one of the most... look, I like a lot of podcasts, right? But like... I'm not being dismissive of anyone's podcast that is the same in every episode, but because there's something nice about that, right? People are very comfortable just listening to the same thing, and just with a little bit of a variable changing it. Whereas, like, I mean, genuinely, I spent years trying to get Adam Buxton on the show, right? Yeah. This is a funny bloke, right? And he came on and just wanted to talk about death for the first 20 minutes of the show.
Remember that one well.
Now, I in no way feel that was a negative, because that's what makes our show.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the dimension we give people. It's like we don't invite our guests onto the show with any kind of expectation. It's almost like we're trying to capture almost like a snapshot of their thought process. So what?
Well, and how often, Dane, at the end, do you hear them genuinely say, "Oh, I really enjoyed that"? It's like, oh, I guess you normally don't, right?
Yeah, exactly.
or I guess
goes
on with you doing
absolutely,
podcasts?
Or people are kind of confined to a particular topic. So that's the humane side of the podcast, is that we're kind of like, what were you thinking about in the shower today? What was on your mind during your commute to work? And it's really capturing that part, and I think really humanizes and finds the real commonality between us and the audience, because I guess that's what I've always tried to make as part of my narrative in general, is that like before being a comic or a podcaster or creative, you're a human being. And I think, being at podcasts and, lockdowns, there were a lot of implications for mental health. It's important for us to provide that kind of, I guess like an ASMR, but like a more realistic one, where we can kind of discuss even problems that people find, are quite neurotic or, cause some kind of neuroses. They can still feel very calm. So it's very much about also questioning being a much more effective tool to a lot of the polarizing we see online, especially with digital platforms. And there's this real culture where people now want to be like, I want to be in your face and say what needs to be said and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like, that's not always necessarily the etiquette. I think if you can approach topics, particularly taboo ones, in a more inquisitive way, and then leave it open for people that may be from a particular demographic or dealing with that issue or have more knowledge of that issue, we'll leave the floor open to them completely to lose the most layperson terms they can, so we can enlighten the audience and ourselves as well. Like, I enjoy doing the podcast because I ask questions all the time, and it's always refreshing to leave it learning something new, which I can in turn, share with future guests, or we can go back to. So, yeah, I mean, we're trying to create the ultimate pub quiz cliff notes. Like, by the end of this, me and Howard are basically going to go around the UK doing pub quizzes, and we're going to be millionaires, baby. just hustling everybody. Yeah.
All those pint glasses full of pound coins you'll be taking home. One final thing I wanted to ask you. This is probably more as a fan and of the podcast and a regular listener, to try and get that little peek behind the curtain. How prepared are you with these questions? Because it very much seems as if these questions are just asked off the top of your head. It's sort of like the guest arrives and they say, you know what, I want to ask this, and you guys react to it. Or
let me give you a peek behind the curtain, Adam. So I would say predominantly 75 to 80% of the episodes, it is not discussed between me, Dane, and the guests what is going to go on. There might be that I know what the guest is going to ask because they wanted to show me the question, but I don't tell Dane. Right. Dane sometimes might say to me, I'm thinking of asking him something about this, and I'll go, cool, well, I'm not going to ask that. But then there is, and then a very, very rare occurrence where we have someone on, I'm not going to name them, who might be like, oh, what are you going to say? I don't know what, I can get in trouble. Okay, you know, you get these circumstances where we need to tell everyone everything, but it wouldn't ever feel like the world of preparedness.
It's not particularly rigid.
Makes for fun.
And the thing is as well, is that again, the format, the idea of questioning is that by having open-ended questions, it leaves it open for our guests to give a context of themselves. So even though like Howard will vet questions and make sure nothing's too probing or might be too inflammatory, then by us continuing to ask questions out and open-ended, and also paying attention to the answers they may give with earlier questions and the questions they ask, it's much easier for us to conversation to glean what kind. It almost allows us to find out what questions are going to provide more of an opportunity for that person to expand on their way of thinking. So we're not really trying to catch anybody out. It's more of, it's an open-ended question, and they can answer and reveal as much of themselves through their answers as they want. So that's the idea, is that we just really want them
I think there's a secret formula that does go on if you want to hear the secret, like the secret sauce.
Of course.
Like Burger King, well, McDonald's has got the Big Macs.
Yeah,
I mean, there are other places as well, Howard, that have a secret. Yeah, secret sauce. Yeah,
that's very much.
I feel like we're at a point now in society where we realise the main ingredient is fructose. But
the secret sauce of the show. The secret sauce of the show is generally this: the guests ask the first question. Well, in fact, the audience asks the first question, which if it's a really good one, then we kind of debate that for a couple of minutes. Then the guest asks the first question. Depending if the guest says something serious or not serious, then influences which of my questions, I try and keep a few questions to hand, that I ask. Because if they've gone serious, it's quite useful for me not to go serious.
Right.
And then for Dane's question, which kind of wraps up the show, I generally think it's really good when Dane ends up kind of, not that I'm not involved, but like they kind of get a bit of more one-on-one time where Dane might be wanting to ask something really specific. And if someone's listened to the podcast and have got to that point, they'll come with us for the rest of the way, and it might get a bit more niche.
But that's Howard's technique.
So there's a little
technique that Howard has as well, is that it's like we almost present the light and shade of someone's way of thinking. And that allows me to have more of a context to ask the final question, which might reference both of those topics, because again, it's like we've had those two questions allowed us to build up a context for who this person is. So again, it allows me to phrase my question in a way that allows them to expand on who they are based on the information we've already given them. So what we always do is just make sure that it's always about inquisition and learning about who somebody is, and never an accusatory question like, why are you a piece of shit, and why are you like that, what were you smoking when you came up with that song? There's nothing accusatory or, making someone have to qualify themselves to us. It's really just about like, trying to take a genuine interest in people. And I think that's, as people and as audience members, it's what we're all seeking in a form or another. This from human interaction is some kind of validation. And it's the same here as well. So
there's very limited conflict, even if the subjects we talk about definitely create conflict. I mean, when Jonathan Pye first came on, I think that might be the closest one we got to, like, he just didn't know where we would be on the spectrum, so he's instantly a bit more defensive than most people, I would say, because he gets called a lot of names online, doesn't he? So that would be why.
But no, I'd agree. Listening, there hasn't been much conflicts on the ones that I've been listening to, but or if they're disagreements, they're minor disagreements, which obviously is good to have in most sort of discourse anyway, in many ways. But I'm pleased to hear that it's not all pre-planned, because Dane alluded to the fact that it's similar to a sleepover. It's not often that you'd get invited to a sleepover and then sent a crib sheet of what you're going to be discussing. It's those sort of natural conversations.
My really organised auntie.
Exactly. Although that being said, if your friend you might have more in-depth things in school that your friend might not say out in the school playground, and it's the same kind of principle. I just think like within the settings of the podcast, then I always want, and also it's a lot of the guests that we have on, we have a pre-existing relationship with, and so there is a kind of air of trust there where they know the endeavor is not for us to, embarrass them or to antagonize them for the sake of entertainment or for sensationalism. So I mean, yeah, we always want our guests to definitely leave feeling like they've gained something from the podcast as well, other than us gaining a guest and gaining more content. It's definitely a cathartic process for all parties. And as I said, it's interesting when you can have a conversation of this nature where Adam Buxton is talking about death, or discussing like bipartisan politics with Ed Miliband, which for me is something that's never something that I imagined would happen when we started doing the podcast, but yeah, it's come along in leaps and bounds, and here we are, yeah. And as time goes on, I'm pleasantly surprised by the wide range of listeners that we have, and yeah, we really want Question Everything to just be a part of, not just it's a philosophy, and so we hope that kind of like migrates from the podcast itself and also into the minds of people, because like I said, we definitely want to encourage that culture where, especially where there's so much emphasis on freedom of speech, rather than making blanket or accusatory statements or blunt statements to people, maybe ask first. And a lot of the time it's a lot more of an effective conversation tool to listen more than you speak sometimes, and that's the kind of discipline we try to apply to the podcast. Although some people might be like, Dane could stand to speak less, and that's where I'll end this.
It's his bloody name in the show. It's his fucking name in the show. What do you want
You're
from
the
him?
star. Yeah, exactly.
Very good. What fun.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for coming on and discussing the show. And anybody that hasn't looked or had a listen to Dane Baptiste Questions Everything should have a pretty good idea what it's all about now. So if you like the sound of that, go and check it out. I wrote about the episode with Tolly T in a recent issue of Pod Bible because I loved that episode. That's one I'd point people to. But yeah, go and have a look. You've got well over 100 episodes there now. So thanks very much, both of you, for coming on.
Thank you very much. And here's to 100 more when we see you again, Adam. Thank you.